Hi, hello, Joyce. Hi, everyone. Hello. So let's start off where we left off. But first, I do want to mention what we do each and every class. Right at the beginning of the class, we dedicate this class, of course, to the full and speedy recovery of the author of our book, Rabbi Steinsaltz, my mentor too. But in addition to dedicating this class to his full and speedy recovery, I also want to say a psalm that we've now said before each and every class in the past few weeks for his full and speedy recovery. This is a psalm, interestingly enough, that commentaries of the book of Psalms speak of this psalm serving as a special blessing for healing, but particularly for the healing of the mouth. And since he had a stroke and that's where he needs healing, I think this psalm is most appropriate. So with your permission, I'd like to say it, recite it in Hebrew, and then we'll go right to our learning. So, Psalm 45. All right, thank you. Psalm 45. Psalm 45. Okay, let's go right back to where we left off. So, just to summarize very quickly, we're in this chapter of Holiness. I believe that we're on page 61. Am I right or wrong about this? 60 or 61? 62. Yes, that's right. Middle of 62. We'll see. Okay, middle of 62. So we're really ending this chapter. Yeah, we might even end it today, but we'll see. We'll see.
It would be a miracle. Just like Hanukkah.
With the rhythm we followed, there's a small chance we might end it today. But to summarize very quickly, Rabbi Steinsaltz made it very clear that holiness is not something that comes from the human being, but it's something that comes from God himself. And God bestows his holiness upon three realms of existence. The first realm is the realm of space. In other words, there are places in this world that are considered to be holy because God designated them as holy, like Jerusalem. The temple, which is depicted, some of it is depicted on the picture here in this room. But the temple was designated as a holy place, and therefore it is holy. And in fact, from that temple, all of the holiness to the rest of the world spreads. That's the epicenter of the temple. That's why when we pray each and every day, we pray towards Jerusalem, to that epicenter of holiness. That's one realm. The other realm is the realm of time, and there are festivals, there are days within the Jewish calendar that are designated as holy by God in the Torah, and therefore these days are days of holiness, whether it's small festivals or bigger festivals. Small festivals like Hanukkah, or bigger festivals like Passover, biblical festivals. All of them are holy, and it's not just the festivals themselves, but also in the minute details of life. There are moments of holiness, or I would say moments that have the potential to be holy. We quoted the Talmud that speaks of the way God designed Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, right? And therefore, if you were born on a Monday, then that moment is shaped in a very specific way, divinely. So, since Monday is the day in which God separated the waters, so it's a day of separation, of violent separation. Therefore, if you were born on a Monday, for example, you might be inclined to be more angry than others. If you were born on a Tuesday, the day where God created the vegetation in this world, plants and so on, then you're be inclined to be wealthy, because it's a sign of abundance, all this vegetation, all this growth. Anyway, every day has its own touch to it, its own holy touch to it. And that's the second realm, and I don't want to go into all the details, but the third realm is the realm that we're speaking about right now, that he's concluding the chapter with, and that is the realm of the being. There are human beings that are holy. Either they are designated as holy by God, for example, like Kohanim that come from the lineage of Aaron. You're either born a Kohen or you're not, so you're either born in that holy lineage or not. That is designed by God. But in the realm of the being, you also have something that does not exist in the other realms, and that is that you have the possibility of making yourself holy, even though you're not a Kohen, even though you're not righteous or born to be righteous. like a tzaddik, which really includes very few human beings. How so? By involving yourself with God's mitzvahs. Each mitzvah is an opportunity for holiness. That's what the word mitzvah means. Mitzvah means to connect, to partner. Because each time we do a mitzvah, we're really partnering with God, and that makes us holy. And then just in the last paragraph, he spoke about 3 levels of that holiness that pertains to the being. One level is where we become God's soldiers, so to speak, in this world. The other level is that we are elevated to being God's channel in this world, so that everything that we say or think or do is almost what God says or thinks or does. That's the level of which our throat speaks the words of God. We are so connected to God at every moment, 24/7, not 23/7, not 23.5/7, 24/7. We're so connected to God that God almost flows through us, and that's a whole other level of holiness. And then there's the level of prophecy, almost like Moses. Moses was in a state of complete awakeness when he prophesied, and he was able to attain the highest levels of divine revelation, achievement of holiness. That's more or less what he's been saying until now. I mean, of course, very generally. But let's continue here at the bottom of page, or middle of page 62. Right. So take the example of a musician, for example. Musician, there are 2 types of musicians. Musicians that are born with a talent and they have to work on it. Musicians that are not necessarily born with a talent, but they work on it and they adopt that talent. Now, the musicians that are born with a talent, you can say, well, they already are musicians from birth. But if they don't work on it, it doesn't amount to anything. Same here with this holiness. God may have touched a person and say, you know what, you have a soul of a tzaddik. But if the tzaddik himself, if the righteous person himself doesn't work on that talent, then he'll just be a tzaddik in potential, but not in actuality, because he again has to work on it and work on it and work on it. So whether a person has that or does not have that, and that's what he's saying here at the end, no matter how intrinsic it may be, then it's still dependent on our work and how much we can transform ourselves into vehicles of God in this world. That's what a tzaddik is, someone who's completely actualized his talent of holiness. Now, we do believe, though, that everyone has a spark of that talent. Some have more than others. Everyone is born, of course, with the divine soul. We each have a divine soul. The more connected we are to it, the more we have the potential to become that tzaddik, the more we can become that tzaddik. Some have more of that divinity than others. I think the Moseses of the world are born like that. It's not, they're born with that extra dosage of holiness, so to speak. They worked on themselves a lot, but they already have a head start from birth. Most of us, I don't know about you, I can speak about myself, I certainly wasn't born with that dosage, so I can still work with what I have. But if I work with what I have, believe that we can at least become a little bit holy, not as holy as Moses, right? And so if you have a talent like that, so you can go about it in many ways. So first, you can become an electrical engineer, an aeronautical engineer, a mechanical engineer. What type of engineer
how
you
you
become?
live your life.
Because as we know, engineers can be engineers from 8 to 5. But if you're a passionate musician or passionate engineer, an engineer from 8 a.m. to 8 a.m. the next day. And that's what we're speaking about, right?
Yeah, there are
It's not just
24-hour
actualizing the talent
jobs.
in a semi-way, but in a full way. So the Tanya makes a difference between a Beinoni and a Tzaddik, because a Beinoni really is what all of us can become. Beinoni are people who deal with evil inclinations, who deal with the animalistic side of each of every one of us. But they are able to channel that animalistic side and its energies into a positive route. They don't get rid of it, but they're able to channel it. They're able to fully control it. That's a Beinoni. A Tzaddik is someone who can get rid of that evil side completely. Not only get rid of it, but a complete Tzaddik can also transform it so that the evil becomes good. Now, to answer your question, so for the Beinoni, just channeling that animalistic side is for him already that ultimate holiness. And for the tzaddik, that's not, because he's not born to just channel. He was born to become a tzaddik, so he was born to really transform it. But God only expects us to do what we can do, not more than we can do, and also not less than we can do. It's the famous story, and I'm sure you all know it, of Zusha. Zusha, who was one of the great Hasidic Jews of some 300 years ago, who was once found crying and sobbing on the floor, and they asked him, "Why are you crying, Zusha?" And he said, "Because I just came to the realization that when I die, God will not ask me, why wasn't I like Moses? Why wasn't I like Abraham? God will ask me, why wasn't Zusha like Zusha? And to that I will have no answer." And in a way, that's what God expects from every one of us. We can only be Zushas in our own ways. But being Zushas in our own ways, again, means using that talent of holiness, to put it in that with those words, right? 24/7, all the time. It's a very high goal, but I think it's a goal that's attainable. It means even when you sleep, even when you eat, even when you're in your downtime, as they call it in America, even though I never understood that term, your downtime, then you're still being holy. You're still connecting to God. Right, very good, that's right. And that's why you have that opinion in Talmud that he was a tzaddik only in his generation. But really he wasn't a tzaddik standing alone as the model tzaddik. You're right. And Hanoch was the same way, Enoch was the same way, and others were the same way. Speaking about tzaddiks, but it's interesting to note that the main character in this week's portion, in next week's portion, is Joseph. Mm-hmm. And Joseph is the only one among all of the biblical characters that are called a tzaddik. Yosef HaTzadik, that's how the Talmud calls him, and so many other sources call him. No one is called a tzaddik. Moses is, not even Moses is called Moshe HaTzadik. You don't hear that term. You don't hear Abraham the tzaddik. You don't hear Queen Esther the tzaddikah. You hear Yosef. Why Yosef? Because Yosef was a person who was most susceptible to doing the opposite of what tzaddik could do, to being really left at the mercy of other forces in the world. After all, he was sold as a slave. He was accused of rape. He was thrown into an Egyptian dungeon indefinitely. Could have died there. He then became the vice king in a very corrupt power. So he had all of these temptations all the time. And he had all of the reasons to say, you know what, I'm quitting my divinity. I'm becoming someone else. I'm becoming not Zusha, not Joseph, but someone else. And he didn't. And because he stuck to it and he saw his every moment of life as a moment in which he was a mission, he became that tzaddik. And in a way, he set the bar for every one of us, that even if we find ourselves in our own emotional prisons, there's no excuse. We too have to be tzaddikim then. We have to be on that divine mission, yes. In jail, he told the butler, look, I predict that you'll go back in 3 days to work for Pharaoh. Don't forget me. Tell Pharaoh that there's an innocent man here in jail rotting, and time to have mercy on me. And the commentaries say that the butler, what happened then afterwards, the butler did go back. Joseph's prediction came true. He did go back to work for Pharaoh, but he forgot about Pharaoh. Until Pharaoh, 2 years later, had a dream. And that's when he remembered, someone helped me with my dream in jail. Maybe you should use Joseph, that innocent guy. And that's how Joseph eventually came out. But the commentaries point out that because he put his faith in man, he told the butler, hey, you are going to free me from jail. Almost not God, it's going to be you. So God delayed the process by 2 years, which is a very harsh way of looking at Joseph. Joseph is, again, Joseph the righteous. But I want to delve, maybe that will answer your question, delve into what the commentaries say. It's that really Joseph wasn't forgetting about God. When he told the butler, hey, tell Pharaoh that I'm here, he wasn't saying, I don't need God anymore. I only need you. It's not like that story of this guy driving in New York City and he's looking for a parking spot. You know the story? And, in New York, it's impossible to find a parking, so he's going around the same block 10 times. And finally, he says to God, I can't take this anymore. Please, I promise you, if you help me find a parking spot, I'll give half of my fortune to charity. As soon as he finished that prayer, someone goes out of his parking spot, and the parking spot opens up for him right next to him. So he says to God, God, you know what? Forget about what I said. I just found a parking spot. So he wasn't like that. Joseph wasn't like that. Joseph was saying, you know what? Forget God. I'm going to go with the butler. That's not what he was saying. So let's take that into that. There's an argument really about how to go about God's divine presence or providence in this world. Do you have complete faith in God, Or do you believe that God designs everything and God works His magic in everything? Or does God partner with human beings to do so? Joseph thought that God partnered with human beings until that point. That's why he put his faith a little bit in the butler. And then the commentators are trying to tell us, no, that God doesn't need human beings to work His magic. Yeah, and you can even ask, the Maccabees themselves were human beings that partnered with God in a way to bring the miracle to the Jewish people. The butler was so the Maccabees saw themselves as agents of God. If you use a person like that, then you can have faith in a person like that, because really you're having faith in God, because he sees himself as an agent of God. Joseph was having faith in the butler, who had no connection to God whatsoever. And having faith in a person like that is almost going the other way. And that's not something we ought to do. Right, absolutely. So, no doubt, I don't know about the punishment. Only God knows about the punishment. We don't know how God punishes man. That's always been a mystery and will always remain a mystery. We do believe in reward and punishment. How God executes His punishment, what type of punishment, that we don't know. Maimonides elaborates, he speaks very extensively about that. But you're right, the higher level you are, the more is expected of you. The more clean you have to be, and more you have to ensure that no filth enters your life. You know that as a doctor, when I tell my children, go clean your hands for supper, the cleanliness of their hands at that point is not the same cleanliness I want to have on my plate when food is served. And it's not the same cleanliness that doctors want to have in the hospital bed or in the hospital's syringes and so on. There's levels of cleanliness. The higher you go, and the more careful you want to be. So same year, God expects from the tzaddik a much higher level of cleanliness, right? And that if he brings any type of filth in his life, then that could create consequences. This goes into a different Kabbalistic discussion, but it's a beautiful one, and that is that the word punishment in the biblical context is klala. It doesn't mean punishment means curse. That's not a curse that God brings upon us. It's a curse that we bring upon ourselves. I don't know that because the introduction to the whole section about punishments or about curses is where the introduction to that is God presents before us the path of blessing, the path of curses, and God tells us choose. So really, what God is saying to us is that if you choose one path, then that will be the path that you bring upon yourself curse. It's almost a consequence. It's not something that just falls from above. But on the other hand, I just want to finish. On the other hand, also that at any given time, every human being has the possibility to make a U-turn and to stay away from those punishments. And those punishments won't befall a human being if he makes that U-turn. It's one of the 13 principles of faith that we have to believe that there's reward and punishment. And when he speaks of that, 13 principles of faith that were authored by Maimonides, and he uses the word onesh, you're right. The word in Torah is klala, but I do want to dwell on that word for a little bit. Klala, commentaries explain, it comes from the word kal, which means light. And why does a person fall into that path of cursing? Because he's light-minded. Kal da'at, they say. You're light-minded. You lose control. You lose control of the intellect over the heart, which is the way it's supposed to be. It's not your emotions governing your mind, it's your mind governing your emotions. Both are important, but your mind needs to channel your emotions. The minute you become light-minded, your emotions get the better of you, then you can fall into the path of cursing. I remember that as a teenager, I asked Rabbi Steinsaltz, in Israel, until today, everyone smokes, right? Everyone smokes cigarettes. It's terrible.
It's terrible.
So I once asked him if it's permissible to smoke, So he said, whether it's permissible or not, that's a halakhic discussion, but there's a deeper point here. And he said the question when you smoke is who's controlling who? And if cigarettes control you, then it goes against the very foundation of Judaism, where you are supposed to be in control. Your mind is supposed to be in control. Your soul is supposed to be in control. And the minute the other forces control that, then you've lost it. But it's true in this context too. That klala is where you lose control. That's really what it means. You're light-minded. You lose control. In the ethics of our fathers, it goes like this: Yagia kapecha ki tochel ashrecha v'tov lach. That if your hands or the palms of your hand will labor for you to eat, for you to provide for yourself a livelihood. Ashrecha v'tov lach. Fortunate are you if that's the case, and goodness to you. What does that mean? That if you use the palms of your hand to provide for yourself a livelihood, that you are fortunate, and that goodness will pursue you. Why? What if I don't use the palms of my hand? Will I not have goodness? Will I not be fortunate? And Tanya actually explains that no, that's the way we should approach this world. This world can only be approached with the palms of our hands. Our mind must remain above it, above this world. Like Rabbi Steinsaltz himself says, we can be in this world, but we can't be of this world. It can't mix with us. That's why it reminds me of the most famous dream, where from the middle of Genesis, of Bereshit till the very end, everyone dreams, right? Jacob dreams, Joseph dreams, Pharaoh dreams, everyone dreams. But the dream that set off all these dreams, and maybe the most famous dream in the Torah, is the dream of Jacob, Jacob's ladder. Now, before he dreamt, what did he do? What did he do? He took a few rocks. He was looking for a few rocks to lay his head on. Now, it's not comfortable to lay your head on a few rocks, right? So I understand he was maybe looking for a pillow, but go get yourself a feather pillow from Walmart. Why a few rocks? So, and the answer, according to Hasidic commentators, the Kabbalah, is that Jacob understood this exact message. That if you're going to lie in this world, don't lie fully. Have your head above it. So create a separation between your head and this world. Let your palm of the hands, involve yourself with this world, but you have to stay above it. How do we know that an animal is kosher? That's because it has split hooves and it chews its cud. These are two signs. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe, actually, Rabbi Schneerson, explains that these are two signs for kosher human beings too. That a kosher human being has split hooves. What does it mean? That when he's walking in this world, it's not his entire being walking. There's something split. There's a space between him, just metaphorically, of course, and this world. And also he chews everything this world feeds him. He chews it. He doesn't just swallow anything and everything. But everyone is unique with the head. Just to reconnect it to the 13 Petalled Rose here, I think that's what a tzaddik is. A tzaddik is a person who's always in control. He might be working. It's not that he's not working, right? He might have a job, and he might, who knows what. He might have bills to pay, who knows, all the worldly stuff. But he still remains above it. His head is with God. And his thoughts and his speech and even his actions is with God. There's a story of the author of the Tanya that was quoted a few times, but Shneur Zalman of Liadi, he once came to one of his students, his Hasidim, and he said, "I'm jealous of you." And this was a man who was a businessman. He would go to the marketplaces of Poland and sell stuff and buy stuff. And he would tell him, "I'm jealous of you." And one day, a student said, "Well, Rabbi, why are you jealous of me?" He says, "Because you go to the marketplace and you meet all these people, and then you speak to them about God, and you speak to them about an idea from the Torah." And he says, this creates such light in the heavens that even the angels tremble from that light. Your ability to bring divinity to this world is so great. Is much greater than the ability I have as a rabbi who sits, in his private chambers. But in a way, even when we're walking, you see, just like the chassid, even when you're in the marketplaces of Poland, and you bring that divinity, that means you're in control. You don't allow that to control you. You still remain. There's another story about the Chafetz Chaim, about Yisrael Kogan, who was one of the great luminaries at the turn of the 20th century. He once had a shoemaker come to him and he said, "Rabbi, no one's coming to see me. No one's buying shoes for me, fixing shoes with me. I don't know what to do." And the Chafetz Chaim told him, "Well, if you would sit in your store and study Torah, you'll see soon enough people will start coming in. And that's what he did. And each time he would open his book to study, another customer would come in. And he didn't understand what the magic was. And so he went back to the rabbi after a few weeks of so many customers just because he opened his book. So he said, Rabbi Kogan, what's the magic? And he said, it's very simple. Each time you study Torah, the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara, tries to disturb you because he doesn't want you to study Torah. So what can he do when you're sitting in the store? He'll send you a customer. He'll send you a customer. And that's why you've had so many customers. But in a way, you see, so when we deal with this world, you have this evil inclination that tries to strangle us, to take us away from that mindset of study. If we can just remember, we have to be busy with customers, but we can remember that really we belong somewhere else. I think that helps us become slowly but surely that tzaddik. The Zohar speaks about that it says, Ki v'ka Hashem tzur olamim, be'yud hey Hashem, and with Yud and Hey, God created the world. What does that mean? Yud and Hey, those two Hebrew letters. So the Zohar says Yud and Hey says all sorts of things, but one of the things it says is that Yud is Adam and Hey is Eve. God created the world with man and woman. That's why when God wanted to create Adam and Eve, he said, Na'aseh Adam, let us make man. Speaking to the man and the woman that will be created, saying, well, we have to elevate this world together. We're partners in this together. So God created the world with a man and a woman, with each and every one of us, all men and all women. But the man is the Yud, and the woman is the Hey. And what the Zohar is really saying is that the man only has a little letter, the Yud. A spark of divinity. Barry, John, Seth, we're the Mark. Sorry, we're the only one here. But a little bit of Yud. The woman is much more present. That's why I think women have the potential to be much more present than men. So they have the potential to be a tzaddiket. All right, let's continue. Bottom of 62. The ordinary man. Beautiful. And you know, it's interesting that we're ending this chapter with this thought, because I think that's what Rabbi Steinsaltz is to all of us through this book. That person who's holy, who transmits God's holiness to each and every one of us through his words. And that also explains, of course, you know, the custom of time immemorial, that when we seek a blessing, we turn to these holy people for a blessing. But because they're connected to God, divinity flows through them so easily, to the point that even if God doesn't have it in his plan, so to speak, to heal a person, but this holy man blesses a person with healing, the holiness of that person has so much impact and so much power that can bring healing upon a person. God almost has to change that flow because of the holiness of this person, because of this being. That's what the Talmud said. Tzaddik gozer v'kadosh baruch hu mekayem. The tzaddik can decree and God has to fulfill. Not in all cases, but in some cases, that's due to that tremendous holiness that a person brings to the world, the holiness that can almost supersede God's intentions, which is something that's hard to understand. But I do want to speak a little bit here about just this line here. In this sense, the higher the level of a saintly person's holiness, the more he is like an angel acting as a vehicle. But there's a story I just read this past Shabbat about every week there's a blog with a different story about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and because he's touched thousands and thousands of people, so it goes on forever. It's been going on for so many years. But there was a story that just this past week. It's called Mind Counter. You can Google it if you want to be subscribed. But story about this man who had a close relationship with the Rebbe and he received many blessings. The story in and of itself is not important to this. But he once had a private audience with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he brought his young 5-year-old son with him, and his son was very agitated. And so he gave him his keys to play with, and at one point the 5-year-old son threw his keys on the Rebbe, and he felt very uncomfortable. And the Rebbe told him and his wife, don't worry, that children are children. And he was upset with his son, and when they came out, before he even said anything to his son, who he thought wasn't there, was agitated and so on, his son tells him, what was that light on the Rebbe's face? And the man said, there was no light. He said, yes, there was a light from the Rebbe's face. Sometimes children can see what we adults cannot see. But in a way, that's what he's saying. The more a person is like an angel, the more connected you are, the more you radiate with that light. And that light is therefore contagious. And by cleaving to a tzaddik like that, then you're touched by that light. And that light then continues to flow through you and through that blessing. So by connecting to Rabbi Steinsaltz's words, no doubt we're connecting to his light. And the light then, his light, which is Hashem's light, really continues to flow through us, especially if we can translate these words into action. I do want to say that there's a passage from the Talmud, I think it's in the Tractate of Shabbat, very powerful passage that says that if your teacher looks like the angel of God, kabel Torah mipiu, then you should study Torah from him. If he doesn't, then run away from him. And the commentaries, that's the statement of the Talmud. How do you know what an angel looks like? Have you ever seen an angel? I haven't. Have you? Is anyone? So what is the Talmud trying to say? How does an angel look like? How will I know if my teacher looks like an angel or not? So you have the Kabbalistic interpretation, which is what we spoke about. If you radiate light. But you have the simple interpretation, and that is that if he is connected 24/7 to God, if he's a vehicle of God in this world, that means he's an angel. That's what angels are. Angels are robotic, really. Angels fulfill God's mission. They can't deviate from the mission. So if your teacher is like that, then you should study. If not, then, the Greeks weren't like that. The story is told of Aristotle, who was caught in an act of promiscuity by his students, and the students were shocked. And Aristotle said, you taught us not to do this. Aristotle said, what I teach is what I teach, and what I do is what I do. In Judaism, it doesn't work like that. No, you're right. But I would say beyond the sensation and the feeling, I think love is also an action. And I can love my wife all I want, but if I don't help her clean the dishes and buy her flowers and do those actions, then my love really doesn't mean much. So it could be a very strong and very real feeling, right? But it's got to be translated into action. And I think to conclude with this, because Rabbi Steinsaltz, at the end of the day, is the author of this book, but you know me, and I sometimes not afraid to express my emotions, but I've said to Rabbi Steinsaltz many times that I love him, and the last time I said so was after his stroke, and he still mumbles a few words, but I said that to him, and he said, "Tamshich la'asot v'la'asot v'la'asot." So continue to do and do and do and do. Thank you very much. Thank you again. Thank you.